guess I can put it to you like this. A pointer is a variable. That's the first thing you've got to know about pointers. They are variables. You declare them just like you declare any other variable, and you assign them using equal sign and all the rest of it. They are just a variable. However, what do they contain? Well, they don't contain integers or floating point numbers or individual characters or things like that. They contain memory addresses. A variable that contains a memory address. Quite frequently, but not always, that address is the address of another variable. In other words, you might have an integer variable, and that variable might be called x, and then the pointer would be a separate variable. You create a second variable, which would be a pointer, and that pointer may contain the address of the first variable. You get that? Well, I'll draw you a diagram. This is a standard diagram that I always like to draw when I talk about pointers. It helps me understand them very clearly. I like to think of the entire memory of a program or the entire memory of a computer as one big long row of boxes. Does that make sense to you? You've got all the available memory on the computer, or at least all the available memory to this program, stretched out in a great big long line, a very, very long line, certainly longer than the one I've drawn here. It stretches from the 0 memory address way over on the left all the way through to, I don't know, several million bytes, depending on how many megabytes of memory you've got available, all the way over on the right side. And in each box you've got a thing, a variable, or a bit of your program, or something. Each box is taken up by something that your program is using to get itself from A to B. So if you've got a variable, let's say a variable called x, which is an integer, it's obviously going to be in one of these boxes. Let's assign one of them. The x can be the box that's got memory address 103. Now these numbers 103, 105, they're just arbitrary, and I'm just using them for illustration purposes. The real address is probably more like something like 286.49127, but you get the general idea. So x is the label that we put on box that is actually numbered 103. So if you think about it, the address of x, if you like to think about it in these terms, when we're going to have to start thinking about it in these terms, the address of x is 103. If you had another variable next to it called y in 104, then the address of y would be 104, and so on. Now that doesn't mean that the value of x is 103. That doesn't mean if you said, if you did a little printf that said what's inside x, you'd find 103. You wouldn't. We have to put something in that box. In other words, we have to initialize x at some point. Let's say we initialize it to the value 5. So we say that x contains the value 5. We also say that x, the address of x, is 103. Okay, so far so good. I think everyone will understand where we're at so far. Next, we label another piece of memory. We take the piece of memory that has the address 111 and we give that another label. We call that PTR, or we call it, well, I would pronounce that pointer. It doesn't really matter what you call it. It's just another label on another piece of memory. Now, if pointer, or PTR, was an integer, then we could put an integral value, an integer value, inside that box. We could put the value 7 into that box. However, pointer is not an integer. I'm going to declare it such that it is not an integer. I've declared x to be an integer, but I'm not going to be declaring pointer to be an integer. I'm going to be declaring pointer to be, well, a pointer to an integer. Okay, so in other words, look at the paragraph above. A pointer is a variable that contains a memory address, usually the address of another variable. I'm going to say that pointer, the variable called pointer, contains the address of the other variable. I'm going to say it contains the address of x. In other words, it contains 103. Now that looks like it contains an integer, and I guess it does in a sense. I mean, a memory address is an integer value. However, we are interpreting that integer value as the address of another variable. I hope this is making sense. So we can say here that the variable called pointer contains the address of the variable called x. I'll say that again, it's quite important. Pointer contains the address of x. I'll put that another way. Pointer points to X. Thus, they're called pointers. This diagram is extremely helpful. Extremely helpful. I found that whenever you get stuck trying to understand what's going on in a piece of pointer code, draw yourself a little diagram like this. If you meticulously fill in the boxes and assign everything the right values, then you'll find pretty quickly that your understanding of pointers increases dramatically. Okay, so we have a variable called pointer that points to X. In other words, it contains the address of X. Now, through the variable called pointer, we could actually access the contents of X, which would be, in this case, 5. So it is possible for us to get to the value 5 by going in through pointer, if you know what I mean. I haven't showed you how to do that, of course. I've got to show you how to write code to do exactly that. But this is how we'll do it. First, I'm going to show you all the syntax surrounding pointers. That's on the next slide.